Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? Welcome back, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, grannies and gators. It's Tuesday, October 22nd, and we're going to have a lot to cover again tonight. We're not going to run too much longer than a regular schedule tonight, but um, a lot of stuff we're going to follow up on the BC election, some interesting uh, tidbits of information coming out from that. We're going to look at that a little bit. Terrorism wins in Canada. You're not going to believe what you're going to hear in 60 seconds or so from Michelle Ferrari. Mainstream media confirmed dead. This is predominantly a poll covered in the U.S., but I think in parity and scale and comparison, it's pretty relative to Canada. MAID, Canada's obsession with murdering its own citizens. I'm not the only one that believes that this government of Canada is echoing the Nazi regime of old, and some more liberal scandal updates. Surprise, 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 right? Um, and we're going to take a little bit of a longer. So, the meat and potatoes dish tonight is going to be about BRICS, what you need to know, and why ultimately I believe it's going to win. So, for those that were, looking at more information from BRICS, this is going to be a good segment for everybody to catch up on, and a couple of off the out and left field stories that you wouldn't have come across anywhere else. Where about some Goodwill and charity scams. It's probably going to make you sick, and you're probably not going to be surprised. But these are the kinds of things that happen when you are led by a little potato, and there's going to be a future price to pay for many decades, I think, from the cost of this, and some changes coming, whether we are ready or not for those changes. Is going to be irrelevant because we're not really going to be controlling all of those changes as they come to us. So let's see, we'll get this party started here. Guys, as always, I want to remind everybody, make sure you get plugged in on Substack, please. With the insanity going on, the level of escalation of the censorship, that is the place where I can deliver you all of the receipts, the links, the information. This is what it looks like, what you get over there. This is all free. There you can choose to subscribe for $8 a month if you want over there. But this is what you get. You get all of the links, the resources, all of the graphics, images. You can download them from Substack. If there's PDFs, everything that you need to know to get plugged in to some of the best platforms. Catch up on some of the other stories. We recommend a bunch of other podcasters and truth. The good guys in this media war that we are entrenched in. But that's the best place to get it. You can find it all, of course, on whatsupcanada.org, where you can just watch if you want. No information, just 2 clicks, hit play, and you can watch the stuff. But this is the best way to get onto the Substack platform. It lets me know where our viewers, our subscribers are coming from. And now more than ever, guys, get plugged into New World Precious Metals. We talk about this with Bryce every Friday on Bankers Bandit Bullion and Bucks with Bryce. And I think most of you guys here in this community are pretty well rehearsed on what's going on. We're going to, as we dig into BRICS, this might make a little bit more sense to everybody. So that's the best way to get plugged into Bryce directly. And the other thing that I want to talk about for just a quick second is our Patriot Switch partners. I don't think people quite understand what the opportunity here is with these guys and what they do for us. And it really bothers me. We all do things, buy things like toothpaste, dish soap, laundry detergent. We look after ourselves. And why do we continuously feed Unilever, Procter and Gamble, and Johnson and Johnson and these guys to do that? People have, I think, have some misunderstandings about what we are and do over there. And I'd like to hear from you guys if you have hesitations or questions about what Patriot Switch is, what we do, and what it can do for all of us. I can't imagine going and feeding BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street a dime ever again in my life anymore, thanks to those guys. So now into the news, the juicy tidbits. And we're going to start with British Columbia over on the West Coast. And of course, the elections over there that have got everybody going, what just happened? And I am not a purveyor of, or a believer, I should say, of coincidence. So of course, as we covered, some of the shenanigans yesterday, there's more, as to be expected, coming out about what exactly is going on in British Columbia. So Eva Chipiuk, infamously the lawyer that grilled Trudeau during the inquiry to the implementation of the Emergency Measures Act. So she's a sharp cookie. If you don't know her, you should. So she had some things to say about this, and I'm going to read this out there for the folks that are watching on their 4x2s. Below is a great breakdown between hand counting and electronic tabulators. Long before there were electronic tabulators, I was a scrutineer. It was a fun way to get involved and to get to understand the logistics behind voting and counting the ballots. Below identifies issues with electronic tabulators, and while he doesn't necessarily say there's a problem, he is highlighting concern. I think she's talking about a post below. And this is great. We should be able to identify issues and talk about them, and most importantly, solve them if they really are a problem. I am, however, getting really tired of people throwing around the term conspiracy theorist to when people are asking questions and demanding answers from our government. This is our job as citizens, and it's called transparency and accountability. In Alberta, I understand we're going back to hand counting because in the event of a problem, the default is to hand count, because it is the tried and tested system that works. So if that's not what we have to rely on in the end, we might as well start with it. No. And what she's referring to, and this is a pursuant to the conversation based on this interesting post about amendments that were made to the Election Act in British Columbia in 2019 by none other than Mr. Eby, the now benefactor, the beneficiary of reinterpreting, shall we say, how ballots are recognized in British Columbia, alternative voting options, adding following definitions. So these guys are rewriting shit on their own and then saying, see, I won. And anybody want to try and convince me that this isn't election rigging? So alternative voting options, assisted telephone voting, auxiliary compartments, and ballot printers. Interesting thing that I think somebody should be looking into a whole lot deeper into Bill 43 in 2019, the Election Amendment Act in British Columbia. So if somebody is calling you a conspiracy theorist for standing your ground and asking questions about this insanity, hold your ground. You are probably correct. And it's going to take a whole lot more people in British Columbia to stand up and say, nah, not buying this crap, right? So from British Columbia, we go to here in Ontario. And this is a most disturbing clip, ladies and gentlemen, from member Michelle Ferrari, pardon me. Again, another one. If you don't know her, you probably ought to. But listen to this and we'll chew on it. It's just a minute and 30 seconds long.
Hey everyone, Michelle Ferrer here in the back of the House of Commons. And last week, 1 week ago today, I shared a video of what we witnessed just a block here from Parliament, 7 p.m., broad daylight on a Tuesday, of a man overdosing the mask in front of Byward Market. It was shocking. It was traumatic. There was, the state of the street in Ottawa, just outside of Parliament Hill, is absolutely unbelievable. And people say that's the situation in my downtown. That's the situation across this country. And now you have headlines like this coming out. DND, Department of National Defense, moving 1,000 employees out of Ottawa office building due to safety concerns. So now you have even the bureaucrats.
Pardon? Did you all catch that? Let me play that part again.
Lines like this coming out. DND, Department of National Defense, moving 1,000 employees out of Ottawa office building due to safety concerns. So now you have like even the bureaucrats can't even go to work because the crime and the chaos is on the streets. And this is all directly linked. When you make life unaffordable, you drive people to crime and chaos. We have the worst leadership this country has ever seen, and it has to change.
So now I'm not going to argue with her that it has to change. We have the worst leadership in the history of this country. But here's my question, and I don't think that she can attribute, or any of us can attribute, 1,000 Department of National Defense employees being moved out of Ottawa because of safety concerns of people overdosing on the streets. That is absolutely not a snowball's hope in hell the reason that 1,000 Department of National Defense, this is our military services, there's not a snowball's hope in hell that anybody can make me believe that that is the reason why they are moving them out of Ottawa. What are they lying to you about? I think everybody here probably has a much better idea about that than what perhaps some of the people in Ottawa are admitting to. So I think that's a direction and something that is going to completely slide underneath the radar of any of the mainstream media and news. You guys hearing about this on the fantasy news platforms? Probably not. So this is something that I'm going to be pursuing harder. I think that this is more in lines to what is developing on the streets for the last year, and they're getting reinforcements, 4,000 fresh reinforcements, fresh from Gaza. The gun smuggling, the weapon smuggling, the arming of these groups, their blatant statements on the streets, and this is what we get. This is what we get from the mercenary media, the mercs in media, the so-called mainstream media, and wonder why nobody's trusting anything that they're hearing, right? And why we know they're lying to us. We can see it on our streets. We can hear it from our own ears and their own mouths, what they intend to do to Canada. And yet the legacy media talks about none of this. 1,000 DOT members is Ottawa a target? This is something that we have to consider given the actions of our petulant little meat muppet in chief in Ottawa, Lord Farquaad, Mr. Sparkle Socks. He is writing checks against Russia and other places and Canadians that only the people are going to have to pay out on. Like, I mean, this is just absolute absurdity. So this is an interesting poll that basically signifies the death in a poll of the legacy mercenary media. So in general, how much trust and confidence do you have in the mass media, such as newspapers, TV, and radio, when it comes to reporting the news fully, accurately, and fairly? A great deal, a fair amount, or not very much at all. And in 1972, between 60 and 75% had a great deal of trust. In 2024, about 12% of Republicans, conservatives in the US, have any trust in the media. About 28% of independents have a little bit of trust in the media. And only 54% of Democrats even believe the mainstream media mercenaries anyway. So I thought that was a very interesting poll from Gallup that absolutely justifies this little community that we've established here. And I'm grateful for all of you guys that help keep this getting out despite all of the abuses of the Meat Muppets and Swamp Zombies in Ottawa. So now we're going to switch to a little more diabolicals. This was back in Canada. Mr. Mark Holland is incredibly frustrated these days because Canadians, how dare they, wants to travel and take their kids on road trips while he is struggling to find enough medical professionals to escalate the murder of Canadians under this guise of MAID. Our government is obsessed with murdering its own citizens rather than helping them. And I wish this story couldn't even be made up. And like this Mr. Zhu says, no matter how bad you think the euthanasia stories coming out of Canada are, there's always a worse one. And this is, sickening. And again, not going to find this in the mainstream media. They don't want to talk about it. Why? Because it's particularly the disillusioned, the disadvantaged, the assaulted, real Canadians that they're targeting with all of this. So, in a third story, a man in his 40s with inflammatory bowel disease who is socially isolated and addicted to opioids and alcohol, I wonder why, was told about MAID during a psychiatric assessment. His family wasn't consulted beforehand, and the MAID provider drove him to the location where he received an assisted death. And we were warned. And MAID is absolutely an abomination, a crime against humanity, and absolutely echoes the Nazis. And here, even though this article goes back from Forbes, goes back to August 15th of 2022, where they stated Canada's new euthanasia laws carry upsetting Nazi-era echoes, warns an expert. And what did they do? They expanded it to where MAID is the third leading cause of premature death in Canada. Rather than receiving assistance, they're asking for more than Canada and Trudeau can give. Why? Because they're bringing 4,000 more Gazans to Canada. And what does the Conservatives argue about? Cutting red tape so we can get more foreign workers into the healthcare system. Cut the red tape. Get more of these migrants and these other people from other countries that really don't give two shits about who they're caring for, so long as they're getting a free ticket on Canadians' dime into Canada. Right? And the CBC says, based on liberal statements, that MAID helps them balance their budget. How convenient. Typical liberal progressive thinking, right? And Mr. Mark Holland is, 100% on board. So this is a bipartisan initiative where Mr. Holland cannot get enough healthcare professionals to step up and take part in the slaughter that he has to retrain, re-educate, and restock the cupboard in the medical system with people that will be willing to take this as standard operating procedure. Do you think anybody think it's coincidence that due to the DEI program, 75% of the new medical students are diversity and equity positive? No whites allowed? Do you think that's coincidence, or do you think that's restocking the cupboard for butchers in our government's agenda to de-Canadian Canada, right? So that's another another diabolical, evil agenda at work in Canada that nobody else is talking about. But we have to keep going. We have to keep going. And there's more. Oh, but wait, there's more. Oh, but wait, there's more, right? It's like the damn ShamWow commercial with these progressive liberal monsters. So next up is an update from Mr. Scheer. Although I am not a fan of Mr. Scheer, he has the authority to speak and articulate this latest dose of gasoline on the liberal dumpster corruption fire that is going on in Ottawa. And this is an interesting segment, so I thought it worth listening to you guys, and given I've been playing so many liberals lately and need to play a few conservatives from time to time, right? So I hope you enjoy this little clip from Andrew Scheer, and we'll chew on it a little bit here right away. So there we go.
Once again, thanks for watching.
Oop. My bad. See, as you can tell, I already watched it. I did watch the whole thing, right? Try that again.
If government officials funneled $400 million of your tax money into their own pockets, you would have heard about it by now, right?
He has $1 billion fund whose own bureaucrats say reminds them of the sponsorship scandal, whose executives give money to their own companies.
But you probably haven't, because when liberals are in power, the parliamentary press gallery doesn't like to highlight liberal corruption.
There's been explosive testimony by a whistleblower on this prime minister's $1 billion green slush fund that's seen $150 million misappropriated and gone to liberal insiders.
Liberal appointees to a board that got to make decisions as to which companies got grants worth millions of dollars, taxpayers' money, gave those grants to their own companies. A scandal like this should be the lead item on the news day after day. There should be banner headlines on front pages every time there's a new development. There should be shadowy figures in parking garages smoking cigarettes, handing out documents to hardworking investigative reporters.
I can't tell you who I am, but I worked on the campaign.
Hey, Mr. Smithers! But none of that is really happening. Instead, the parliamentary press gallery is focusing on all different kinds of issues where they can try to distract Canadians from the real essence of the scandal.
It's the headline everywhere. Prince Charles, before he was king, shrieking at seeing shrink wrap, or plastic wrap as we call it, for the first time.
So instead of letting the mainstream media confuse and distract, let's get right into the essence of this scandal.
The findings that were the findings used to suspend SDTC were known to the federal government all the way back in May of 2023.
There's a fund called Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and it's supposed to give grants to companies who have legitimate, innovative ideas to improve Canada's environmental record. Now, SDTC is a huge organization funded by the government to the tune of $1 billion in tax.
Really good question, Carol.
Appointed their friends to the board. That board gets to decide who gets the cash. What did they do? Those liberal insiders sat around the table.
I can't disagree with you, Mark.
Handing out money to their own companies. $400 million of your money went not to improve environmental outcomes, but to line the pockets of liberal insiders. $334 million over 186 cases to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. That means they benefited from the decision, and they were the ones who made the decision. $58 million to 10 projects that weren't even eligible and couldn't even demonstrate any environmental benefit at all or any development of green technology. The ethics commissioner found that the chair of this board, this liberal appointee, broke the law when she funneled money into her own company. After 9 years, the Trudeau Liberals aren't even trying to be creative in their corruption. There was a giant pile of money, which is why we call it a slush fund. And the Liberals on the board that got to make the decision as to who got the money gave it to themselves. This is so blatant, it got caught the first time the fund was audited. If this storyline were part of a movie or a television series, it probably would get rejected due to lazy and bad writing. And how do we know this? It's because a brave whistleblower testified at committee and blew the lid wide open on this gross corruption scandal. Here's what the whistleblower said. It should never have taken 2 years for the issues to reach this point, and what should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that allowed SDTC to continue wasting millions of dollars and abusing countless employees over the last year. Now, if you were in government, you might think, well, hey, let's hold the lawbreakers to account. Let's let the truth come out, and let's let the RCMP charge those who knowingly stuff their own pockets with your cash. But instead, what are the Liberals doing? They're fighting this tooth and nail. They're actually paralyzing Parliament. to keep these documents hidden. Here's what that same whistleblower said about criminal activity.
I think the Auditor General's investigation was more of a cursory review. I don't think the goal and mandate of the Auditor General's office to actually look into criminality. So I'm not surprised by the fact that they haven't found anything criminal, because they're not looking at intent. So if their investigation was focused on intent, of course they would find the criminality.
And do you believe that the RCMP doesn't have authority to investigate in this matter?
No, I definitely believe they have authority.
That's why we need the RCMP to have all the documents so they can see who knew what and when, who was directing people to make those decisions, and who got rich off of your tax money. So the Conservatives passed
This story ain't over yet, folks.
to produce all the documents, have the government send all the evidence to the RCMP, and the Liberals refused. So the Speaker ruled that Parliament can't debate anything else until it deals with this corruption scandal. If they're willing to pay the political price for seizing up Parliament, grinding it to a halt, the only conclusion possible is that there must be something so bad in these documents, evidence so damning,
I'm overdue.
they are willing to pay
Let her know.
the political price for grinding Parliament to a halt and cancelling part of the parliamentary session. But Conservatives aren't going to let them run away from the scandal. We're going to continue to fight on behalf of you, the taxpayers. We want the lawbreakers held to account, and we want to get your money back. Once again, thanks for watching.
All right. Now, the reason I wanted to play that is because he gives a good articulation of some of those things and asking the right questions the right way.
You won't believe what happened in the House of Commons last week.
Sorry.
Someone used the words.
Sorry about that, guys. We'll get this figured out someday. But this from Michael Barrett today. And I did, thanks to one of our followers here, a long time from the beginning supporter, Tom. I'm a step closer to maybe getting to talk to Michael Barrett. So, but he's got a 1 minute y'all should hear here today.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost or the corruption. Today, the Auditor General confirms a full investigation into the Liberal government deals awarded to a Arrive scam contractor, GC Strategies. This shady two-person firm that did absolutely no IT work charged taxpayers $2,600 per hour for over $100 million in government contracts. Sole source deals that froze out hard-working Canadian companies. In the Arrive scam scandal alone, the Liberals' preferred contractor, GC Strategies, pocketed $20 million of a $60 million price tag for an app that should have cost a fraction of the price. Why did the Prime Minister give these Arrive scam middlemen $100 million since he took office? And when will the Prime Minister stop robbing Canadians of their hard-earned money and doling it out to well-connected Liberal elites? After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up for these corrupt Liberals and their well-connected friends. Common sense Conservatives are going to end the corruption and bring home a carbon tax election.
So, disregarding the final campaign stumping, of course, which is, standard procedure for the theater that they're in. This is getting to the point where the police, they can smell the political winds changing too. So whether it starts with some low level backbencher, at some point this is going to come to a head. And the only reason that it's getting this far and it's going to come to a head is because of you, the people. We are getting so much better at articulating the problems and demanding accountability and not going away. We won't go away. We are getting tired of being dismissed. And it's just one scandal after another. You heard it, what was it, 183 ethics violations, yada, yada, yada. But they're starting to eat themselves. They're throwing themselves under the bus. It's projected, I think, that the Liberals are going to make less than 50 seats in the next election. And Trudeau, I think tomorrow they have their cabinet meeting, and after 2 weeks of our parliament basically being neutered, Trudeau's going to have to make some very difficult decisions. So this week, we will see whether he prorogues, which is good news for us, or calls an election, which is good news for us, or continues to blow holes in the bottom of the the political ship, Liberal. But this week is going to be a very interesting week. So I think that it's rather telling that more and more scandals are coming out. But this one here from this gentleman, I'm not really familiar with him, but he was bringing up something that's a little deeper into the Mark the Carnage Carney fixer who was brought in by the WEF to fix the the mess the young global brats have made, and has some firsthand personal experience on the heat pump scam, of which Mark Carney is making billions with a B. Conflict of interest, more collusion, corruption, and trading at the political trough. So this was worth listening to, and I thought I'd share it with you all today. So
Already done so, and hit that bell notification so you never
as you can tell,
what
I
you
actually
need to
listened.
know. Hey all, welcome to my channel. I hope you're having a great day. Well, today in question period, Michael Bear brought up a very concerning issue, and that was carbon tax carnies association with the heat pump industry. Now, if you own a heat pump, you're already aware of the inefficiencies that the government doesn't seem to share very often with the population. But you may not know about carbon tax carnies' relationship to the heat pump industry. And if you don't have a heat pump, this is information you really need to know. Let's first take a look at an exchange during question period today, and then we'll discuss it.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
In another conflict of interest involving this Liberal government's de facto finance minister,
Us
we
too,
found out that
Brenda.
he's been caught using his access to lobby governments to benefit himself and his company. It's carbon tax carney's heat pump hustle. And he's claiming it's green policy, but his only policy is to line his pockets with green. And this prime minister is
Nailed
shielding
it.
him from Canada's
Again.
conflict of interest laws and lobbying regulations after 9 years of these NDP Liberals. Taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Will they just have carbon tax carney testify in committee?
The honourable leader of the
If
government.
Trudeau prorogues, those go away, Bill.
Again, the Conservatives,
We're not
when
letting
they have
up on it.
Canadians that oppose their policies, all they know how to do is attack them instead of respecting people and their differences of opinions. they
Hail
go after them
Karina.
personally. Mr. Speaker, that's not how leaders in this country should act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, I can assure the member opposite the Canadians take it personally that every time that
Yes.
they're given the opportunity, they don't help out Canadians, but instead help out well-connected Liberal insiders like Mark Carney with his heat pump hustle, carbon tax Carney, conflict of interest Carney. It's stacking up in such a way that we can't even keep track of all the scandals involving the de facto finance minister when the prime minister lost confidence in the finance minister. So now Canadians want answers about the access that carbon tax Carney has been given and all the Canadian tax dollars that he's lining his pockets with. Will they just instruct the de facto finance minister to testify at committee?
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, again, there they go attacking private citizens. And it just goes to show anytime a Canadian citizen speaks up against them, what do? They go on the
Hail
personal
Karina.
attack. But Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Conservatives and the Conservative leader. Why will he get his security clearance, Mr. Speaker? It's a question Canadians across this country are asking because they want to know what and who is he trying to protect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Correct.
You can see
But we
Michael
take the
Bear
targets
brought
we
up
can
the
see.
Issue of carbon tax carnies' relationship to the heat pump industry. He called it the heat pump hustle that carbon tax carney is in on. And this should be of great concern to everybody. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the real issue of heat pumps. And as I said earlier, if you have a heat pump, you already know this information. But if
All right, so I'm not going to play the whole clip from him. We've got Mountain Man here, who basically said it all in one single comment. I have 2 heat pumps, haven't turned them on in 3 years. They're useless. And that's basically what he goes on to say. And if you do use them, the cost will bankrupt you and cost you your home, basically. All right, so now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes segment of today's smorgasbord of insanity. The BRICS. People who have been wanting something a little deeper on the BRICS. So the segue into that is BRICS is also inclusive of India and China. They're partners in this endeavor, and they have had for years and years and years this border conflict going on. And this from the Gateway Pundit that tells is an article on BRICS. As the summit begins, India and China announce a deal ending the military standoff over the disputed frontier. So they're done fighting, and they're going to go to work with the idea of BRICS. So I thought that was a significant segue into a couple of other points of what is driving more countries, and we'll talk about in depth a little deeper. Why are countries joining BRICS? Because they're, well, as we'll explain, but this is one of the reasons. There was some leaked classified documents from the Pentagon where by Ariane Tabatabi. I have no idea if I'm saying that even remotely close, but guess which one of her closest friends and colleagues is Phil Gordon, Kamala Harris's national security advisor, and the man who will direct her foreign policy if she's elected. So this is Kamala's backbenchers, or Kamala's general-in-chief in waiting, leaking out that the choice that's coming is an Iran with the bomb or bombing Iran. So he's kind of already given Kamala the that's their foreign policy will be either Iran's going to have the bomb or we're going to bomb Iran. So basically saying they have no other choice but to bomb Iran. Kamala will be cornered and committed. So there's just that little tidbit from Iran, which is a pivotal player in this as the Ukraine conflict winds down. These threats about bombing Iran's nuclear, whatever might be, and Putin has said, no, you don't want to do that because that's going to legitimize you guys as targets. So what's basically shaping up in the conflict side of it is Putin and Russia is they become more emboldened through their partnerships and collaborations with India, China, as they stop fighting and squabbling with each other and become more aligned. Putin is basically drawing his line in the sand that America is going to be held accountable if they intervene in certain measures around the world. They are going to force their hand, and so America is dangerously close to being recognized as a legitimate targets by Russia and China. So this game of charades and deception that is allowing the American people to be, blindsided with another, unnecessary international conflict, dangerous grounds. But another reason why BRICS is going to become why it's looking more and more like they might win in the games that they're playing is this little segment. And this is the kind of society that they don't want. They are rejecting everything we are exporting with DEI, woke, equity, all of this crap. The nations that are primarily backing BRICS, they're done. They're done with the woke DEI crap. But of course, the WEF is still chasing their desperate, delusional utopia of net zero. And the audience here is told that the British public will be bribed first and then forced to change their behavior and make themselves poorer. We need a referendum on net zero, not punishments for the unbelievers.
We are, broadly speaking, agreed that we need to get on track towards a net zero, climate safe and nature positive future, but we know this will not be easy. And
Listen
we're
to
going
this.
to need to change behaviors of both individuals, but also the way that our industries and corporations and also our governments work and practice. We're going to need to do this through a mixture of carrots and hopefully perhaps not so many sticks, and some kind of mix. And there's a very active and live debate as to how we go about it. But we're likely to see an increasing move towards a more stick-like interventions into the future as things worsen if we're not able to act.
So, yeah, if you don't come into alignment with net zero at the command of the WEF Fourth Reich, they will bring out more and more sticks. This guy sounds like he could be or should be working for Trudeau. Well, they're all working for the same boss, Trudeau's boss, right? So, yeah. All right, guys, this is the longest clip of the day. Pretty short stuff after this. But this is a great piece from Sebastian on explaining BRICS and why this is so significant. What's going on started today. He'll explain it more, but this is a historical first, what started today. The largest gathering of nations for policy development that's ever been held in Russia started today, hosted by BRICS. And Sebastian does a phenomenal job of telling you everything you need to know. And if you have more questions, we will chew on it in a little bit.
BRICS doesn't exist to dethrone the dollar. The dollar will do that on its own. The United States will destroy the dollar through their policies. That's not BRICS' job. Hello, my friends, and welcome back.
Right out of the chute.
Today is Tuesday, October the 22nd, and we have the day one of the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia. This is one of the biggest events of the entire year, yet the Western mainstream media is not reporting on it. And when they do, they're very misguided. But don't you worry, we're going to address all of that. Speaking of addressing, in the first part of the video, I want to talk about what BRICS is, why is it so hated in the West, yet so very popular everywhere else in the world, and also, obviously, we have to go over the narrative that's created in the West around BRICS, which, like I said, it is very misguided. In the second part of the video, I'm going to go over the updates that we have from the summit. There's plenty of them, a few statements, some numbers. Situation looks very interesting already. So let's start with what is BRICS? Well, BRICS, in the most basic form, is an organization comprised of countries from the global south and Russia. That's essentially what it is. So we have Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates. So BRICS has 9 members. Now, there's over another 30 members who have expressed an interest to join BRICS at the earliest possibility. Some of those are Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Turkey, Algeria, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. So why does BRICS generate so much interest and persuade so many countries to join? Well, the answer is very obvious and very simple, but we need to go all the way back to the end of World War II in 1945. You see, during those times, there were 3 major power players. There was the United States, there was Europe, and then there was Russia. The problem is that Europe and Russia were absolutely torn apart by the war itself. They were nothing but rubble for the most part. United States.
This is a huge point.
And that's how the American empire, as we know it, has been born. Because they weren't torn apart by the war, and their economy was booming, and they had the military resources still intact to represent a major
They were the biggest, baddest dog left on the block, and they were completely, basically unwounded. The homeland was not touched. So that set up America. And some people took advantage of that.
Military power. Well, that's exactly what they've done. I'm going to try to streamline everything I'm about to say from now on, just because otherwise we would be here for about 3 hours. So what happened after the war? The United States saw an opportunity to create this empire, and they've done it through many means. One of those means was to create these institutions such as the United Nations, NATO, etc., because that's, like I say many times, that's an extension of the United States into the world policy, and most importantly, at the time, into European politics. That's why most of the Europeans these days, and when I say Europeans, I don't mean the people, I mean the leaders, are so pro-America. That's the reason, because the institutions that they serve in were created by the United States. Now, at the time, we have to understand something. Because Europe was damaged so heavily economically, above all things, they had to go along with all the loans and the Marshall Plan and all of that. That created an opportunity for the US to become the next dominant power for the next many decades. And that's exactly what it has become. Now, we can fast forward a little bit, and what we saw was exactly what we see from every empire that has ever existed. Maybe it starts well with a few good intentions along the way. The problem is, because the discrepancy in power in between the empire and the rest of the world is so big, it tends to get the empire a little bit too pushy. And that's how we've seen a lot of wars starting from the 1960s onwards. We saw the United States implicated in all of the major conflicts possible. Speaking of wars, the major
58
war that was
wars,
during
actually.
those times was in between the United States and the Soviet Union, or as we know it, the Cold War. Let's fast forward to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and now we have only one major power player, which is the United States. The Soviet Union was gone. Europe was still finding its way. They still do to this day. They haven't really progressed that much. And now we only have the United States who was ruling them all. And that created the problem for the rest of the world. Why? It's because the attitudes that the United States have adopted after the Soviet Union collapsed. They had no more competition, quite literally no more competition. And they started to use the power of the dollar, which they had, because the dollar is the world's reserve currency after the Bretton Woods financial system.
It's all about the money.
They used the dollar to push and encourage, as they would say, other countries to do their bidding, to vote a certain way, to adopt certain policies. That's how the United States maintained its hegemony. That, and the fact that they have over 800 military bases around the world. No other country has anything even remotely close. This is why the defense budget
over
of the United
900.
States is well at over $1 trillion per year. Many people, when we talk about that budget, say, well, they must have the best military in the world. They have a top-notch military, that's for sure, but it's not representative of the money they spend. A lot of that money just goes into logistics and supporting overseas bases.
Correct.
That's the reality of things. So, back to the US empire. When an empire reaches such heights as the United States did at the beginning of the 2000s, with nobody in sight as competition, they tend to become overly aggressive. And that's exactly what we've seen. We've seen so many wars. We've seen the bombing of Yugoslavia. We've seen Afghanistan. We've seen Iraq, Libya, Syria. It was one war after another. And even behind the scenes, when there was no wars, the United States, through all of those military bases and all of these institutions, they managed to keep the world in check. And the United States never really came, how should we put it, never really faced an unfavorable outcome because they control the institutions. That's how they maintain their power. That in turn, my friends,
America doesn't pick a fight that they don't think they can win. That doesn't mean they haven't lost, but they don't pick a fight unless they think they can win.
Here is where we get to BRICS. That created a need in the world for an alternative to the United States. Why is that alternative needed? Well, it's very simple. Because the United States, if, for example, you are, let's say, you're Nigeria who wants to join BRICS and you want a loan to develop, to do whatever, you have to go to the G7. You have to go to these institutions that are controlled by the West. And you would think that you go there, you get the money, you get a payment plan or a repayment plan, and then you go home. But that's not what happens. You see, when you borrow money from these institutions, it comes with all sorts of strings attached. Certain policies get pushed on you. Well, we can give you the money, but you have to do this. You have to agree with this. You have to push this. Whatever is on the agenda. I don't even want to get into those things, but I think you know what I mean. The LGBTQ and all of that. That all gets being brought into the conversation. And in certain countries, well, that's
what Trudeau talks about when he's away.
Work. So that's why the world looked for an alternative.
Burning up jet fuel
did not exist. And that brings us to 2000, to the beginning of the 2000s. We've got China and we've got Russia. Still very, very early in their stages of development. Russia was just finding its feet again under Vladimir Putin because it was an entire disaster after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then China, equally, they were starting to have a stable economy at the beginning of the 2000s. Fast forward to 2006, and we already now see these two countries, China and Russia, starting to look like something strong on paper. And that created the first opportunity for them to actually create something called BRIC. Why BRIC? Well, because it was Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the four original members of BRICS. All of these four countries had something in common. Huge population overall, very much potential to develop economically, and they were in dire need of getting from under the West's thumb. That was the long story very short. And BRICS was born in 2006. BRICS pioneers a system of multipolarity. What is multipolarity? Well, the opposite of the United States, which promotes a unipolar world. They want to be in charge of everyone and everything. And we're going to get to those numbers and see exactly how they do it. But that's what the West promotes. When you hear G7, think of unipolarity. When you hear BRICS, think multipolarity. That means that there's not that the entire power is not concentrated in one single state. There's not one state to rule them all, as we've had with the United States. So that's what BRICS is. Now let's brings us to today. What is the narrative in the West against BRICS? Well, they try to frighten the population, the media that is. They try to frighten the population into believing that BRICS is coming for you. BRICS will destroy the dollar. BRICS will take your lunch. Nothing like that is even remotely on the agenda of BRICS. They simply stepped in where the United States and the West failed to do so. Like I said, people want economic freedom. If you're a rich country, and when I say rich, I don't mean necessarily in terms of
American dollars.
I mean under the soil, resources. Maybe you have a lot of tourism that you can explore and exploit. If you're one of those countries, you will never do well under the West because the rules of the game do not favor you. Because like we know, the West values the rules-based order far more than the international law. Now, BRICS is there to step in when the United States doesn't. But this puts the West into a predicament because they do not want this competition. And that's how we get to these narratives around BRICS. They want to Do
you remember the quote I quoted so often from Buckminster Fuller? But you don't beat a corrupt system from inside. You build a new system and make the old one obsolete.
Destroy us. No, BRICS doesn't want to destroy you. BRICS just wants to be an alternative for the people who need it. And as we can see, there's so many people who need BRICS, which is why we have this long of a list of countries who want to join. So that's, in my humble opinion, what BRICS is. That's how it was born. And I don't think it comes to replace the dollar. In fact, I think we have a statement from the Kremlin, just from today, saying exactly that. We're not in it to compete with the dollar. We will be an alternative. Now, naturally, there is competition between BRICS and the dollar, and I'll explain how that works. But the destruction of the dollar is not the goal of BRICS. That's just the consequence of BRICS' existence. One last thing that we need to mention about BRICS and the need for BRICS is the Western sanctions. The war in Ukraine has exposed the West and the West.
Ding, 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 sanctions.
And to get a
BRICS wouldn't even be an idea
every time.
if America didn't have 2.8 million sanctions around the world.
Russia is the most sanctioned country on earth and in history. There's over 25,000 sanctions dropped on top of Russia. And this is where BRICS stepped in. But the sheer fact
100%.
that Russia and some other BRICS members have experienced the Western sanctions,
The same
Western tactics,
thing.
this gets them even closer together. And this is a
So
consequence. Not
these
of
guys
something
created
that
this.
the BRICS nations concocted. This is West's own doing. The West has brought this upon themselves through their overly aggressive policies. Now, we have the BRICS summit going on. It is on day one, but we already have a lot of interesting things. But I want to start with this. This is an article from Reuters, and I just want to show you just how disconnected the Western media is from what is really going on there. And not just disconnected, I think they're being like this on purpose. They want to misguide people into thinking that BRICS is some sort of boogeyman. Putin hosts BRICS summit in Russia under shadow of Ukraine war. Russia wants the BRICS summit to showcase the rising cloud of the non-Western world, but Moscow's partners from China, India, Brazil, and Arab world are urging President Vladimir Putin to find a way to end the war in Ukraine. Right off the bat, the West is trying to portray this narrative or to push this narrative that, look, there's some disagreements there because Russia has been a naughty boy. Yes, every country wants for that war to end. And as I've said before, the BRICS nations, they do not need this war. They want a stable society and a stable outcome for everybody, just so they can develop faster. This is not in their best interest. But this also gives us the answer, I think,
Remember where we started with China and India taking a pause, shaking hands, saying, yeah, we're done. We're going to go to work now.
The most part, to why Russia is moving so slow in Ukraine. Many people said, well, Russia cannot bring down Ukraine. How can they do this or that or the other? What we see in Ukraine has nothing to do with Russia's military power, in my humble opinion. Russia has far more military power than we see in Ukraine. But there's rules to this game, and those rules are probably unspoken. They're just the gentleman's agreement amongst the BRICS nations, not between Russia and the West. And that is for the Russians to not cause too much stir in Ukraine, because then the West might step in, then the BRICS countries might feel forced to step in, and it's just going to be a mess. This is why Russia is taking its time. Obviously, there's another reason, and that is the one that Vladimir Putin indicated every single time, and that was Ukrainians are our brothers. Therefore, we want to tread carefully in this war. Why? Well, because one day this war will be over. The BRICS nations. Nothing could be further from the truth. The BRICS group now accounts for 45% of the world's population and 35% of its economy, based on purchasing power parity, though China accounts for over half of its economic might. Here we have another narrative, and that is, well, China has to be singled out as basically, well, they're the hegemon of BRICS. No. You see, China is the most important power player in BRICS. No doubt about it when it comes to money, but BRICS doesn't function on those parameters. But you see, this is where you get a sneak peek into the Western mindset. For them, the one who has the most economic power, that rules them all. Not in BRICS. However, let's just do a little parallel. They make it look like, well, they're not making it look, they're saying it, that China accounts for over half of its economic might. Well, let's take a look at the G7, shall we? Let's see if the G7 does it differently. Now, what you see on the screen, my friends, for those of you who are only listening, I'm going to try to give you all the numbers out loud. You have the GDP of the G7 countries from the year 2000 all the way to 2024. So let's just stop at 2024. I understand there's a lot of debate on what GDP is, how it's calculated, all of that. I'm not going to get into it. I just want us to have a baseline. So as we can see, the United States' GDP in 2024 was $28.7 trillion. The next one behind it is Germany with 4.5. Now, I've done something just so you don't have to. I've added all of those numbers up from the rest of the G7, except the United States, and it amounts to exactly 20 trillion US dollars. The United States is $28 trillion. That puts the US share of GDP at 60%. So when they talk about BRICS and they say, well, China amounts to over half of that, So does the United States in the G7. It's the same exact situation. But they never tell you that. They never tell you that. Putin, who is cast by the
So it's
West as a
almost
world
mirror
control,
structure.
told reporters from BRICS nations that BRICS does not put itself into opposition to anyone, and that the shift in the drivers of global growth was simply a fact. Quote, "This is an association of states that work together based on common values, a common vision of development, and most importantly, the principle of taking into account each other's interest," he said. That is the principle of multipolarity right there. And I think
They don't have to be woke to do business with them. Bingo.
Putin is totally right. BRICS doesn't exist to dethrone the dollar. The dollar will do that on its own. The United States will destroy the dollar through their policies. That's not BRICS's job. BRICS's job is to be an alternative for the countries who share the same interest. And that is a multipolar world where everyone is being treated with respect and their national interests are not threatened by the whims and wishes of a hegemon. That's what we've seen in the West. Isn't it funny that actually, let's go back to the graph that I showed you before. One thing I did not point out to this graph is just take a look at it. Take a good hard look. You have the G7. You have Europe in there. You have the United States. You have Canada, Japan. Look at the US. They've grown from year 2000 onwards. Look at the Europeans. The Europeans have...
We're all spending less. The US is spending more.
Mostly down for what? For 4 years, they're only down and flat. Isn't it funny? Well, it's not funny at all because all of this is deliberate. In order for the US to grow, Europe has to be down, especially Germany. And how do you do that? Well, you take the Russians out of the story. You do not let the Russians supply any more energy to the Germans, and then you manage the Germans. That's what they do. It's management. Anyway, let's go back to the article and see what else we have from there. Putin, who ordered troops into Ukraine in 2022 after 8 years of fighting in eastern Ukraine, was peppered with questions by BRICS reporters about the prospects for a ceasefire in Ukraine. Putin's answer was, in short, that Moscow would not trade away the 4 regions of eastern Ukraine that it says are now part of Russia, even though parts of them remain outside its control, and that it wanted its long-term security interest taken into account in Europe. But what we get from this quote from Vladimir Putin is that in his mind, things are very clear. Those regions, well, those are out of the conversation. We can negotiate the rest, as in NATO membership and all of those. Those are the things that will be imposed on Ukraine, I think, from Russia moving forward. Those regions are not going to be part of the negotiations or part of the conversation at all. Because when Vladimir Putin says something, we don't really see him walking it back, as we see on the daily with the Western leaders. You know, Biden says something and tomorrow someone has to take it back. We never, ever have seen that in Russia, ever. Putin said that the West has now realized that Russia would be victorious, but that he was open to talks based on draft ceasefire agreements reached in Istanbul in April of 2022. Well, that's exactly it. The only major difference was that at the time in Istanbul of 2022, Ukraine could have kept those 4 regions. I think the difference is that if they start from that draft, those 4 regions will leave the conversation. I think that's the major difference. Anyway, I have another article here. This one comes from the Russians, and they give us a little bit of an update with regards to what's happening at the BRICS summit right now. So we see this one, new development bank to provide financing in national currencies to global south. This is absolutely huge because this is the exact thing that the West fears the most. By providing countries loans in their national currencies, what that means is the dollar can be bypassed. It can be repaid in other currencies. The dollar is not needed for the transaction, and that takes away little by little away from the West hegemony. That's exactly what they fear the most, and that's exactly what BRICS is doing at the minute. Another bit of an update, cooperation within BRICS.
And while it's growing little bit by little bit, what's happening with ours?
Cooperation within the BRICS framework is not directed against anyone or anything, neither against the dollar nor against other currencies. It pursues the main goal of ensuring the interest of those countries that participate in this format, Peskov said. commenting on the recent reports by The Economist about the discussion of an alleged plan to defeat the dollar at the BRICS summit. I'm glad they've clarified this because, like I said, I think twice now, BRICS is not working on a new currency in order to replace the dollar, because that's what they're doing. They're working on a new currency as we speak. But the goal of that currency is not to replace the dollar, but to have a currency that can be used in transactions as an option to the dollar. Because, say, for example, you're Russia and you have a lot of assets in Europe and the war in Ukraine starts. What if, hypothetically speaking, what if the Europe would say, well, now we freeze these assets and then we confiscate them? How would you feel about it? Well, actually, let's call the Russians and find out, because that's exactly what they went through. Once you have a new reserve currency, well, not a reserve currency, but an alternative currency to the dollar, that means that the Western sanctions, well, you're pretty much immune to them. There is nothing they can do to you. And that's why they're working so hard on that one.
The goal
Speaking of the money,
of BRICS.
one last thing I will say is that the BRICS nations' share of the world's GDP is now 5% higher than the G7. So the BRICS economies are more productive and better overall than the G7, and that includes the United States.
So to put it in street talk, the black market is now gone legit with banking, and anybody that the U.S. has sanctions on now still has an opportunity to do business around the other half of the planet without dealing with the U.S. or oversight, basically. So that's in essence what, in very short form, these guys are doing. And, as, like you said here, Arnie, our fiat currency, worthless paper, they're getting ready for it. They're getting ready for it. This kind of, it's always about follow the money. With every country, every nation's leaders are murderers, they're killers, all of those things. None of them are absolutely, loyal, or none of them are guilt-free. But understanding that this whole chaos between New World Order, the top and the bottom, is all syndicates and crime lords and narcissistic egomaniacs, dictators, whatever the case might be, whatever terminology we use today, it's no different than it used to be in the past. Bad guys, the axis of evil, the alliance, all of those things is just playing out with different labels, different names, different people, different front men, different syndicates. But right now we're going to be going through a restructuring of the maps. Maps are changing, and that isn't always what happens, but this is kind of where the situation of the planet is, and what the significance of BRICS is. The underground, the black market for business is opening slowly and going legit.
This is a major shift in the world's politics and geopolitics, and this is here to stay. BRICS is going to be a big part of our lives moving forward. This is why I wanted to make this video, just as an introduction to BRICS, to talk a little bit about the summit, and also I'm going to cover all of the updates that will come over the next couple of days in my daily videos. My friends, thank you so much for joining me in this one. Share your thoughts.
So that's Sebastian Sass. He's one of the people that is directly plugged into the best information and articulation of stuff in Europe, and it's they have a bigger investment in what goes on over there than and a much clearer insight into things. So he's a good one to follow. All of these links will be in the Substack tomorrow. That's what you see scrolling across the bottom of the screen. So we're going to shift gears here a little bit to close off the last couple of stories. I think we've got about 4 minutes of video between a couple of different videos. Totally different direction, but next one up, guys, is what do you guys do when you want to donate things? Where does the stuff in those bins really go? So this is a CTV W5 piece I thought was quite compelling, and you might want to know.
The clothes we're putting in these donation bins are bait. They've been outfitted with hidden trackers that will follow their every move. Many bins say they're for charity, so we wanted to find out if that's actually true. And if not, who are the people collecting your clothes? Ali Harnham donates to this clothing bin in Toronto 3 times a year. A sign on the bin from the Canadian Community Support Foundation says it's a charity. Where do you hope it goes?
To people that need it. Definitely to people that need it.
The charity side of this is very small.
Kate Bain is the managing director of Charity Intelligence, a Canadian organization that researches and grades more than 800 charities across the country.
I think that I'm putting money in a clothing bin and it's going to help a homeless person. You need to maybe have a cold shower and just sort of take a reality check.
Bain says, well, there are bins that raise money for real charities. Some aren't what they seem.
Those are private businesses, which leads us to the question, what's going on and who are the actors in this business?
To get to the bottom of that, W5 producer Joseph Loyero and I made some of our own donations.
We bought these trackers here, these little GPS.
Yeah.
We're going to stick them inside all these clothes and then toss them in the bins and see where they go. We're going to be able to follow them anywhere in the world.
W5 concealed and dropped trackers in donation bins across the Greater Toronto area and began tracking them. This bin says, make a child's dream come true. Please donate today. The tracker we put inside ended up at this store where rags from recycled clothes are sold in bulk. One of our items was tracked to this industrial yard north of Toronto. The bin was labeled as used clothing donation bin in support of local charities, but it didn't stay local. Neither did the tracker we put in this one. It went to Montreal, across the Atlantic to the Italian port town of Genoa, then down to the North African country of Tunisia. 4 trackers in total landed there, 7,400 kilometers away. At this warehouse near Sidi Bouzid, a worker said Canadian clothes are common.
These clothes are from all brands and come from all over the world, including countries like Italy, France, and Canada.
He was even wearing a hat with a Canadian flag. Last year alone, records from Global Affairs Canada show $181 million in used clothing was shipped overseas. Tunisian politician Mohamed Adel Al-Hantati says much of it just ends up as garbage.
Most of these textiles currently end up in landfills. A significant portion of textile waste still ends up in waterways.
Here in Canada, bins also raise money for legitimate charities. But remember this bin Ali Harnham donates to? A tracker we put in that is one of the ones that ended up in Africa. And records say it had its charitable status revoked in 2018.
For profit, I don't think it's right. Sorry. We're donating it to give it to people that need.
Harnham says the next time she donates clothes, she'll take a closer look at the bin.
I don't think to take a closer look at the bin, but to take a closer look at the place behind where you're taking your stuff. There are options. This is, just where, these scammers and parasites, $181 million worth of stuff. And we've got people, 2 million people in Canada, that could use stuff. But yeah, just, I don't know how to even make it make sense anymore. But, it's embarrassing to say the least, if you ask me. But a bit of a good news one, guys, to finish the night off. This is the last clip, 1:31 from Ivor Cummins. The end of the cholesterol hypothesis in one slide, less than 2 minutes to explain. Case closed. Pharma, guys, you could take your cholesterol nonsense elsewhere. We see you. I thought you guys would want to hear this.
Engineering, we use Kepner-Trago, and we use a lot of tools to answer what causes are, and distinctions are the key thing. If you find a set of parts or a population that is riddled with the problem, and you've got a set of equivalent parts that has effectively no problem. You know the cause is in the distinctions between them. It's not genetic, by the way. Catavans are the same. It's not genetic. Well, we better look at their cholesterol and see, is that a difference? Because if it's not a difference, that ends the cholesterol hypothesis. One example ends it if there's a negative. So let's say, and actually we have their ApoB bad cholesterol particle counts, which is the real measure of cholesterol in heart disease. It's not the LDL you get in a normal test. Even the industry acknowledges it's ApoB, the number of LDL bad cholesterol parts or pieces is the measure. And these guys have the same or higher LDL particle counts as the guys who are riddled. That's the end of the cholesterol hypothesis. Now, I have 1,000 other pieces of data, but this ends it on its own because of Professor Karl Popper and the asymmetry of proof. If you find a negative, clear as crystal proof, it beats 50,000 positive suggestions that cholesterol causes heart disease.
Pretty significant. I think that bears more more looking into. Sorry guys. I'm going to be doing a little bit more digging into that. Maybe I can get Ivor back on the show for an update, but he's got a great platform. I encourage you to follow Ivor. He's brilliant. We have the opportunity often to get people, I mean, not that it's easy to find people more intellectual than yours truly, but we do get the opportunity to pick some giant brains. Ivor was one of them. Tomorrow we rescheduled and we're going to get to pick the brains of another brilliant intellectual, somebody a little less known, but Brett's going to be joining us tomorrow. And Brett, although you may not know him, you will know his work that he has put into, the backbone of so many different places of people that are fighting for Canadians. So it's going to be a real pleasure and a treat to have a conversation with Brett. He's a straight shooter. So put your seatbelts on and buckle up for tomorrow's show. He's got a Substack. That's where he does his podcasts. I will make sure that you get access to it in my Substack tomorrow morning, guys. So that's it for tonight. So I hope you guys found this interesting or at the least entertaining, and thank you for all that you do. Substack is the best place to find us. Make sure you give this a thumbs up on your way out, guys, or a heart if you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, X, I guess it is. Yeah, what else got here? If you have something to tell me or just a question even, that's the best way to do it. And as you guys know, this platform is community driven. We do this together. I support everybody's efforts to support their favorite truth disseminator, researchers, podcast hosts, journalists, whatever they are. If they're telling you the truth and giving you what you need, support them in this information unrestricted warfare that we're in. That's why we are winning, is because there are not just me, but so many like me. So, but if this is the place that you like to want to help out, this is what keeps it free for everybody. So this is why there is never going to be a paywall around What's Up Canada and the work that we do. So we're all in this together, whether we win, lose, or go into the matrix. We are all in this together. So that's it for tonight, guys. Tomorrow we got Brett, and I love you all. Stay mighty, my friends, patriots, prisoners, hostages. We'll see you tomorrow.